Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Caleb Boak, where he talks a little bit about his spiritual journey and how God changed him when he got serious about his relationship with Jesus and what it means for him to pursue Jesus in ministry. So let's get into the conversation with Caleb. Caleb, thank you for being a guest on our podcast today. We appreciate you taking time to share with us and just allow God to use you. So thank you.
Of course.
As we begin, can you just share a little bit about you, where'd you grow up, family, that type of stuff?
All right. So I actually grew up in the Northwest. Originally, I grew up in Portland, Oregon. Obviously, it's become very infamous now, but back then it was still kind of unknown. Grew up in the 90s. Had a pretty close-knit family. We all grew up in the same house for the most part. So never really moved. Had the same schools. Didn't transfer a lot or any of that stuff. Grew up in church. The Sunday after I was born, my mom would say we were all in church. So never really missed church, and grew up in different choirs in church, Royal Rangers, which is part of Assemblies of God.
What is that?
Royal Rangers is basically the way I like to say the Assemblies of God Boy Scouts. So we do camping, we do learn how to tie knots and start fires, and also memorize scripture and whatnot. So it was a very good formative experience for me.
Did you get badges and stuff?
You got badges. They had their version of the Eagle Scout, and then we also would go to what they call powwows, summer powwow, winter powwow, and we'd get to learn more outdoor survival stuff, and I actually eventually got to learn how to rappel, so different skills outdoors-wise, and also every night we'd have chapel and a worship time, so.
Yeah. That's fun. Would you, would your dad go, or would it be just you?
My dad would typically chaperone, yeah.
Okay. Just be one of the chaperones,
yes.
And so
yeah.
When it's not like each of the I don't know what you call yourself, scouts or whatever,
Rangers.
Each ranger would not have their parent with them necessarily.
Not necessarily. No.
Okay, all right. Well, that's fun. I'm sure there's a lot of good memories that you had with that growing up. And so what has been your church involvement?
So I was fairly involved at an early age. I always felt like a preacher's kid, despite never being one. If the church was open, my family was there. My dad would teach different different classes. My mom was heavily involved in choir and soloing for singing. And my parents, like I said, got me involved very early in choir, plays, wherever they could throw me, I would be there. And I wouldn't say I was ever resentful. I was sometimes a bit burnt out because I was at church all the time. But also, after following Royal Rangers, I got involved on the youth worship team. That's how I got into drumming. At the time, intern, who was the youth pastor's brother-in-law, happened to just have one of the other youth quit drumming in front of me. I was at the church, per usual, wandering around bored, and he looks up at me and says, "You want to try drumming?" And I guess. It was completely impromptu. And from then on, I drummed for the worship team and the youth mostly, and somewhat for the adults, and that kind of got me involved heavily into youth more so. And then I entered as a youth leader and did that with multiple churches. Mm-hmm. Kind of from there, I had gone to Bible college, and that's where me and Kirsten met.
Well, can you share the story how you met?
So Kirsten had not joined the normal typical fall semester. She joined halfway into the year in spring. When she had joined, the first thing I'd heard about her was she had a severe allergy to peppers. And I found this out because I brought peppers. Not knowing about it, I didn't live on campus, so I wasn't completely apprised of new student and information like that. So I was sitting, minding my own business in the cafeteria, eating my food. My mom had packed me fajitas, which obviously has bell peppers. And I just got done heating up the microwave, not thinking anything of it, to have one of the residents of the school, lived on campus, the girl rush in and say, "You have to get out of here." And I said, "What?" I thought she was kidding, laughing. And she's like, "No, you need to take your food and get out. We have a new student, and she's deathly allergic to bell peppers, and you just heated them up in the microwave." And I'm like, "Yeah, but she doesn't have to eat them." And this is what I'd hear from then on from other people. And she's like, no, by smell as well. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
As I'm leaving the school, I pass by her. She's kind of plugging her nose, and she watches me pass by. I'm like, oh, she's kind of cute. I'm like, I almost killed her. And so then I took my bell peppers and I hung my head in shame and left the school quickly to get air out the school. But that's how I kind of met her. I really met her, though. We both took Philosophy 101, and she happened to drop a quote from the show I just finished, Stargate SG-1, and that immediately perked my interest because a girl talking about science fiction is pretty rare, so we kind of hit it off after that.
Well, that's fun, and I'm glad that the pepper incident was minor at
Yes,
best.
yeah.
So anyway, so as one of the challenges that you and your family face, you and Kirsten have had 3 kids, revolves around gluten. Mm-hmm. And some dietary restrictions. Can you share a little bit about what you're going through with that?
Yeah, the summary of it is Matthias from a very young age would complain about his stomach, and we were trying to follow when that happened because he was at the age where it was all 100% truthful. He wasn't making it up to get attention. He was just, my stomach hurt. And we kept noticing it was after he had bread products or gluten products. And we're like, well, we keep hearing about gluten insensitivities or intolerances or even celiac. We knew someone was celiac at the time, a coworker of mine. So we took him off, and it seemed to immediately improve his quality of life. Mm-hmm. He wasn't complaining nearly as much. And during that same time frame, I had some really bad eczema, and I'd heard that having a gluten intolerance or celiac, depending on what it is, can affect your skin. It's not just something that affects your dietary tract. It can affect your skin. It can affect your entire body. And so I said, why not, as kind of, camaraderie, I could do this with him, and, it'll help him not feel so odd, not be the only one not eating gluten in the family. And Kirsten, of course, just cut it out of the household just to make it even easier for her. Mm-hmm. And so we all kind of went gluten-free for a time. And my hands seemed to clear up. So we said, you know what, this seems to be working. Our bodies seem to be healing. So we continued it for a while. Then we found out a little while later that we should probably get him tested for celiac just to either write it off or be confirmed. And like I said, I had a friend with celiac and a coworker, and she said, in order to be tested positive accurately, there has to be gluten in the system. That's kind of the downside of the testing they do. And so we kind of figured, okay, well, we should probably reintroduce some gluten. So right as of right now, we don't have a completely gluten-free household, but we're trying to get him tested. And once we can get a confirmation or whatever, we'll move from there.
Now, that's a little frustrating to have to introduce gluten if it's causing problems, just to be able to get a accurate reading on the test. But what are some obstacles that you encounter with being gluten-free that people might not recognize or know?
I'll say one thing for sure. While Kirsten and I are extremely happy having moved out to Midwest and Iowa in particular, we love living out here. We think that we fit right in, and we've made a lot of friends and feel a part of the community already, more so than we did my entire life living in Oregon, actually. But the one thing we do miss about the Northwest as a whole and the West Coast is they seem to be a bit more aware of people's allergies, including and especially gluten allergies. There's no shortage in Oregon, especially the Portland area, of you have a gluten allergy. There's lots of places you can go to, lots and lots and lots. And if you're vegetarian, whatever, they'll accommodate. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Iowa's still catching up. There's becoming more and more options. It seems every day different places have a gluten-free option. Now, of course, if you're celiac, which is the worst of it, a lot of those places are still not safe to eat because of the chance of cross-contamination between the oil and the fryer or whatever, the surfaces they cook on. So it becomes even more challenging if you're celiac. So I guess just to let people know, if someone does have either gluten intolerance or especially celiac, to be patient. Most of the time they're not looking for attention. They're trying to take care of their body and not hurt themselves. And if gluten does harm them, then respect that and try to accommodate the best you can.
One of the things you just mentioned, though, is that most or a number of places now have a option.
Yes.
So it's not like there's a plethora of options.
No.
It's a very limited menu at best.
You're the typical gluten-free go-to for people I've talked to here in Iowa is salad.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I actually love salad. I'm a fan of it, but after going out to eat and only eating salad for a number of weeks, if not months, you get tired of salad. You want to eat a burger. You want to eat something that's a bit more substantial, especially because, salads are the same price point as a burger and a lot less calories, a lot less nutritional, really. Just less calories and protein. So, you get kind of tired of the same thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And then when someone introduces a gluten-free bun, which allows you to have a burger, it really makes you appreciate that establishment for looking out for you and saying, hey, we got an option for you to try.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I want to come back to a little bit. You alluded to your college experience. That's where you met Kirsten.
Yep.
Can you share a little bit about your experience, your college? What would you enjoy about college? What was your major?
So I was actually in Christian leadership with the intent of eventually, however that looked, joining the ministry vocationally or bivocationally. It didn't really matter to me, wherever God called me. And before I left college, I was just a few credits shy of my associates. And Kirsten was on her way to doing musical therapy, actually. But I actually really enjoyed college. I would tell people my high school experience, while it wasn't bad, it just wasn't enjoyable. I just was bored. I wasn't challenged. I had senioritis from the first day of freshman year. I immediately could tell I wasn't going to enjoy it. And so I made the best of it. I tried to not be super doom and gloom, but I loved it when I had my first day of college and I felt like I was being treated like an adult. I felt like the courses were, challenging, but yet interactive, and I could actually enjoy it. And I felt like I was absorbing a lot more. Also, you get a little bit more of, you get to pick what you want to do as opposed to you have to do this. There's there are certain classes you have to take for the degree that you're wanting, but other than that, there's electives and whatnot, and you get to choose and pick that, which is where philosophy came in for me, and other areas where I even know I was interested until college. So I would say definitely a plus, net plus for me.
Now, when would you say you became serious about Jesus?
That's a good question. So I had already been involved heavily in youth group, and at that time I felt like I was serious about Jesus. I definitely would have appeared to others to be serious about Jesus. I attended church more than anyone I knew, and at one point I even attended multiple churches to play drums for, and youth groups and different things, and I was very busy doing things for churches. But I can tell you one thing for sure, my personal relationship with God was not non-existent, but pretty close. I very rarely read my Bible on my own, even though I was hearing sermons a lot, and I very rarely prayed on my own, real quiet time. So my devotional life was minimal at best. And, I just didn't have a closeness with God. I knew him, I knew of him, I knew about him, but I wasn't close to him. And I didn't recognize that, of course, until I'd spoken to one of my mentors, a man named Jesse Rodley, who had shared with me his testimony of coming on fire or closer to God and taking it serious. And his was, he started college and he started recognizing patterns in his life that he didn't like and that were not biblical, that were not conforming to God's image, and recognized pretty quickly that he wasn't really saved, wasn't really living for God. It was through his testimony that I began to pick up on things in my life that I didn't care for, that I didn't see conforming to God. And I came to the realization that I was either not entirely dedicated or hadn't even gotten saved up to that point. When you're around the light your entire life, it's easy to be convinced that it's the light in you, not around you. And so either way, I basically dedicated myself to truly serving God for the rest of my life at that point, and it was my first year of college. And I did notice a dramatic difference immediately following that decision. It became a lot easier to do the right thing. I was more interested in doing things that brought God glory and not so much me, and not, my ego definitely took a hit, which was a good thing. I was less sure of myself when it came to areas that I shouldn't have been, which was a common issue for most people that age. And I kind of just recognized, I don't have to know it all because God does. And the Bible does say, if you find yourself in a situation and you're not sure what to say and you're being, questioned, the Holy Spirit will come in and help. And that was kind of comforting for me to realize I didn't have to know it all and have all the answers.
So it sounds as though kind of your heart's desires were altered, if not completely changed.
Very much so. Yeah.
It's real easy to do church as opposed to follow Jesus.
Oh, yes.
And sometimes we can run the risk of thinking we're saved because of proximity. Mm-hmm. Just because you're around Jesus things doesn't mean that you're actually following Jesus. And we have to be careful because following Jesus is not limited to saying the right set of words in the right order. Yeah, right. True. It's more than just that, and so we have to be careful that we don't allow the extremes of either to put us in a poor position. Now, when you started getting serious about Jesus, had you already felt like something about ministry before then? Or
yes.
Okay, so can you explain that a little bit? When did you start feeling that?
That's a really good question, actually. I could say that probably the first time I'd considered the ministry seriously was 12 years old. And there's a neighbor at the place I grew up in Portland, where me and a friend of mine back then had been riding our bikes around in our neighborhood, and we'd pass by a certain guy. He'd be in his yard doing work, and he decided to take an interest. Say, hey, how's it going, kids? He wasn't like weird or anything. He was a normal guy that just wanted to say hi to a couple neighborhood kids and kind of be friendly and, get to know us a little bit, because why not? You're being a neighbor, and I feel like a lot more people did that, we'd have a better world. So the guy himself wasn't a Christian. He made that clear when I brought up I was, but he wasn't rude about it. He was just like, yeah, I'm an atheist. I'm like, oh, okay. And I knew about that. And at one point he asked during one of our conversations what we were wanting to do when we were older. My friend was like the typical, I want to be a rock star. I want to, this and that or the other. And I said, actually at that time, I said, I'd like to be, a missionary or a pastor or something like that. And prior to that, I don't remember thinking about it. It just kind of came out. And then when we were done, my friend's like, well, I never hear you talk about that. I know you go to church a lot. Your parents go to church and whatnot, but and I was like, yeah, I haven't really ever said it before, but I guess that is what I'm wanting to do. And it did kind of stick with me. It was, not just a passing one statement and then I was over it and moved on. It kind of stuck in my head, and I do believe that was God presenting the call before I even was aware and truly aware and walking with him. He was kind of like, hey, I've set you aside for something different. Yeah. And so that was kind of more or less the trajectory of my life from that point on, whether or not I was, intentionally heading towards it or God was kind of cutting other things off that weren't it.
Yeah.
It definitely seemed to be, heading down that path was as far as looking at colleges and just different, options for what I could do with my extra time. And while I may never have been a vocational minister, I've served in many churches in different capacities, including youth and just, worship, of course, on the worship team. And my wife and I, Kirsten, do believe that God is still eventually calling me to, at a larger capacity, be involved in ministry. So.
Well, that's fun. Thank you for sharing that story. And one of the things that I'm curious to get your opinion on, particularly because there seemed to be a good period of time where you were younger, but you were doing Jesus stuff, but not necessarily following Jesus. Why do you think people are content to kind of just staying at the same level they are and not wanting to dig deeper with Jesus? Because sometimes we can get, this is where we are, and I don't want to move. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, what it's worth, my 2 cents on the matter, and from personal experience, comfort is the enemy of perfection. If we're called to live perfect, good lives as best as we can on this side of glory, then, our human nature wants to not move. Our human nature hates change for good or for worse, really. And so whatever makes our creature comforts, disheveled, ruffles feathers, or causes growth and pain, and growth does tend to come from pain, either muscle growth or your bones growing. It's not comfortable. Our flesh is going to fight that, and it's going to try to say, you know what, let's just not do it. Let's just stay where we're at. We're good. We're okay. And it kind of, there's a downward pressure, if you will, to prevent, and whether that could be just the flesh. I feel it's a combination of that, the world's pressure. They don't want people to live for God, obviously, because we know who's the principality of this current age. And I believe Satan himself, if he notices someone is striving to be more like God, that's his worst case scenario, is someone trying to do what God's commanded them to do, and he doesn't want to see that, because it can affect other people, make his job a lot more difficult. So I do believe there are influences outside of our own. I feel like we have, like Paul says, the flesh to fight against, our own flesh, and I just feel like there's a lot going for us, as what would seem naturally to not. So kind of our neutral is not growing. And so I do feel the biggest difference for me that spurs me to want to grow and grow closer to God is learning more about him through my own Bible reading. And when I see the character of God and Jesus, and I see his care and compassion for me and what he did for me on the cross, that pushes me towards wanting to grow closer to him and show that I appreciate what he's done for me, and recognize that, I owe it all to him. So why wouldn't I want to grow towards him? But when I'm not focusing on Jesus, it's very easy to focus on myself.
Well, and as you mentioned earlier, that when you dedicated your life to Jesus, your freshman year of college,
I would say so, yeah.
Then it changed your actions, your attitudes, your desires. And sometimes I think I don't know if we limit that God's actually going to do something, or we just say, you know what, I like me the way I am, and I don't want to necessarily change. And we have to own those decisions, right? It's nobody else, it's us. Well, I like to end with a very open-ended question, and in case I missed something or something spurred a new idea in your mind. Is there anything else you would like to share?
I would just like to share with anyone out there that might be watching this, if God has placed a call on your life, or you feel he might have placed a call on your life, whether you're entirely sure or not, to actively seek after that, and to not just put it aside and say one day, because one day may never come. So whether that's just praying about it or actively seeking avenues to be used of God, I do truly feel, whether it's a vocational way or just passing out flyers or whatever, however it looks, God's called all of us to do something in his kingdom. So, find your spot, wherever that might be, get plugged in. And then if you do feel a call beyond that, specifically to be in the ministry, not to shirk that, to actively pursue it.
Well, and you can take baby steps, even just little steps towards the call that Jesus has given us.
Nothing wrong with that.
That's making progress. I think is really important in continuing that momentum that you've started. So.
Yes, correct.
Well, thank you for being a guest on our show. We appreciate you taking time to share with us and allowing God to use you. So thank you, Caleb.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life. And please subscribe to never miss an episode.